Stop whatever you are doing, because what you are about to hear is not speculation, not theoretical analysis, and not the kind of diplomatic posturing that gets softened by morning briefings. Tonight, the single most catastrophic strategic weapons transfer in modern military history has been executed in absolute silence, and the consequences are already reverberating through every command center from Tel Aviv to Washington to Riyadh. Iran has just received from Russia a strategic nuclear delivery capability that renders the entire Middle Eastern security architecture obsolete, the American extended deterrence umbrella meaningless, and Israel's existential security calculations permanently transformed. The number that has just crossed Iranian borders is not dozens, not scores, but 500 fully operational Topol-M intercontinental ballistic missiles, each one representing mobile, road transportable, instantaneous strike capability against every single urban center, military installation, and critical infrastructure node across Israel and the broader region. The Topol-M, designated by Russian nomenclature as the RT-2PM2, represents the most advanced solid-fuel ICBM in the Russian strategic arsenal, specifically designed to defeat American ballistic missile defense architectures through a combination of mobility, rapid launch capability, and penetration aids that render interception geometry functionally impossible. 500 of these systems, transferred complete with transporter erector launcher vehicles, command and control infrastructure, and the entire operational support architecture necessary for immediate deployment, means that Iran has acquired in a single transfer more strategic delivery vehicles than the United Kingdom and France possess in their combined nuclear arsenals. The throw weight represented by 500 Topol-M missiles exceeds 2,500 metric tons, capable of delivering payloads across distances exceeding 10,000 kilometers, placing not merely Israel, but every American military installation from Incirlik to Al Udeid to Bahrain within instant reach. This is not incremental capability enhancement. This is not gradual deterrence development. This is the overnight transformation of Iran from a regional power with asymmetric capabilities into a strategic, nuclear-capable state possessing first-tier global strike capacity. Every calculation that has governed Middle Eastern security architecture for 7 decades has been rendered obsolete in a single transfer that Western intelligence either failed to detect or detected and failed to prevent. If this analysis is giving you the strategic clarity that mainstream defense commentary refuses to provide, this is the moment to subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and share this breakdown with everyone in your network who needs to understand what is actually happening at the sharp edge of global power competition. Because what unfolds from this moment forward will define the next generation of Middle Eastern geopolitical reality. The technical specifications of what Iran has just received cannot be understated. The Topol-M operates as a 3-stage solid propellant system with a reported throw weight of 1,200 kilograms per missile, sufficient to deliver either a single warhead or multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicle configurations depending on mission parameters. The solid fuel design means these missiles can be maintained in ready-to-launch status for extended periods without the logistical complexity of liquid fuel systems that require pre-launch fueling sequences. The mobile transporter erector launcher configuration means each missile system can be displaced continuously across Iranian territory, making preemptive targeting functionally impossible. The time from launch order to missile ignition is measured in minutes, not hours, eliminating the warning windows that ballistic missile defense systems require to execute intercept sequences. The penetration capabilities of the Topol-M specifically defeat the layered missile defense architecture that Israel and American forces have deployed across the region. The missile executes hypersonic re-entry at speeds exceeding Mach 21 or 7 kilometers per second, creating intercept windows measured in seconds against defensive systems optimized for slower velocity threats. The re-entry vehicle employs ablative shielding that defeats infrared tracking during terminal phase, making heat signature-based intercept solutions ineffective. The missile incorporates decoy deployment systems that release multiple false targets during mid-course phase, overwhelming tracking radars with more objects than available interceptors. The terminal phase guidance utilizes stellar inertial navigation backup systems that function independent of GPS, making electronic warfare countermeasures irrelevant. Against this capability profile, the existing defensive architecture deployed across Israel and American regional installations is systematically inadequate. The Arrow 3 exoatmospheric interceptor system, representing Israel's highest-tier ballistic missile defense capability, was designed and optimized against liquid-fuel Shahab-class missiles with predictable trajectories and limited countermeasures. Against a salvo of solid-fuel Topol-M missiles, deploying decoys and executing hypersonic re-entry, Arrow 3's intercept probability degrades catastrophically. The system's maximum intercept capacity is 12 simultaneous tracks, meaningless against coordinated salvos numbering in the dozens or hundreds. The terminal high-altitude area defense batteries that America has positioned across the Gulf states face identical geometry problems, designed for single missile intercept scenarios rather than saturation attacks that exhaust defensive magazines within minutes. The strategic implications extend far beyond technical capability comparisons. 500 mobile ICBM launchers dispersed across Iranian territory create a target set that is functionally impossible to neutralize through conventional strike operations. Each launcher can be relocated to new firing positions within hours, meaning real-time targeting intelligence becomes obsolete faster than strike packages can be coordinated. The distributed deployment means that even extensive air campaigns would require thousands of sorties to achieve meaningful degradation of the Iranian strategic force. And such campaigns would need to be executed against integrated air defense networks that have been specifically hardened to protect these exact assets. Israel lacks the bomber fleet, aerial refueling capacity, and munition stockpiles to execute such campaigns unilaterally. American forces possess the technical capability, but would require operational preparation timelines measured in weeks, during which Iranian strategic forces would be repositioned continuously to complicate targeting. The deterrence calculus has been permanently inverted. For decades, Israeli security doctrine has rested on the foundation of overwhelming conventional military superiority and implicit nuclear deterrence, creating a regional power imbalance that constrained Iranian operational freedom. That imbalance has been eliminated. Iran now possesses the capability to threaten every Israeli urban center with instantaneous strikes that defensive systems cannot reliably intercept. The deterrence relationship no longer runs in one direction. Israel cannot threaten Iranian nuclear facilities without confronting the reality that Iran possesses the means to respond against Israeli cities. America cannot threaten regime change in Tehran without calculating the consequences to allied capitals across the region. The strategic autonomy that Israel has enjoyed for generations, the freedom to conduct military operations, confident that adversaries lack the means to impose unacceptable costs, has evaporated. The geographic compression of Israeli territory transforms these missiles into existential weapons in ways that do not apply to larger nations. Israel measures 300 kilometers from north to south and 70 kilometers at its widest point. A small number of successful strikes against Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, and Beersheba would devastate the majority of Israeli population and economic infrastructure. The warning time from launch detection to impact for missiles fired from Western Iran is less than 7 minutes, insufficient for meaningful civil defense responses. The population density of Israeli urban centers means that even conventional high-explosive warheads would inflict casualties measured in tens of thousands per successful strike. This is not theoretical vulnerability. This is geometric fact. Every Israeli military planner is tonight conducting the same catastrophic assessment. How do you defend against 500 mobile launchers when your defensive intercept capacity maxes out at several dozen simultaneous engagements? How do you execute preemptive strikes against a target set that repositions faster than your kill chains can cycle? How do you maintain strategic deterrence when your adversary has acquired the means to impose costs that exceed national survival thresholds? These questions have no satisfactory answers within existing operational frameworks. The strategic reality is that Israel now faces a threat that conventional military superiority cannot address and that defensive systems cannot reliably neutralize. The American position is equally transformed. For decades, American extended deterrence commitments in the Middle East have been credible because adversaries lack the means to impose unacceptable costs on American forces or allies. That credibility has been destroyed. Iran can now threaten every American military installation from the Mediterranean to the Arabian Sea with strikes that would inflict casualties exceeding every conflict since Vietnam combined. The carrier strike groups that represent American power projection capability are now operating within range of weapons that can target them faster than defensive responses can be coordinated. The air bases that host American fighter wings are now vulnerable to strikes that would crater runways and destroy aircraft on the ground before meaningful dispersal operations could be executed. Washington's options have been systematically constrained. Military action against Iran now carries the risk of regional conflagration that could kill tens of thousands of American service members and devastate allied capitals. Diplomatic engagement now occurs against the backdrop of Iranian strategic capability that renders threats of military force incredible. Sanctions regimes lose their coercive power when the targeted nation possesses the means to impose costs that exceed sanctions impact. The entire American Middle Eastern strategy, built on assumptions of overwhelming conventional superiority and uncontested escalation dominance, has been rendered inoperative by a single weapons transfer that reshapes the strategic balance more dramatically than any event since the Iranian Revolution. The Russian calculus behind this transfer reveals strategic planning operating on timelines that American policymakers have failed to comprehend. Moscow has executed the single most consequential shift in regional power balance in modern history, and has done so in a manner that creates no direct Russian liability. The weapons are transferred, the capability is deployed, and the consequences unfold without Russian forces being positioned in harm's way. This represents strategic judo, using American fixation on Ukraine and Taiwan to execute moves in the Middle Eastern theater that would have been impossible under normal circumstances of American strategic attention. The timing is deliberate. American carrier groups are stretched across multiple theaters. Munition stockpiles have been drawn down supporting Ukraine. Political attention is consumed by election cycles and domestic polarization. Intelligence resources are focused on China and Russia rather than Middle Eastern weapons transfers. Moscow identified the precise moment of maximum American distraction and minimum response capacity, and executed the transfer that permanently reshapes Middle Eastern strategic reality. This is not opportunism. This is patient strategic planning executed at the optimal moment. The Iranian perspective reveals decades of strategic patience culminating in transformed regional position. Tehran has endured sanctions, isolation, assassination campaigns, cyber attacks, and sustained pressure specifically to reach this moment. The strategic autonomy that Iran has sought since the revolution, the capability to defend sovereignty against external military threats, has been achieved through a single transfer that renders American military superiority and Israeli conventional dominance insufficient to impose outcomes on Tehran. The deterrence that Iran has built through asymmetric capabilities, regional proxies, and missile programs has been elevated to strategic level credibility through acquisition of weapon systems that can threaten the existence of adversary states. The regional response is unfolding in real time across every capital from Ankara to Riyadh to Cairo. Every government that has oriented its security policy around alignment with American and Israeli power is tonight reassessing fundamental strategic assumptions. If Iran possesses the capability to threaten Israeli cities with weapons that defenses cannot reliably intercept, then the extended deterrence commitments that America has extended to regional partners become less credible. If Israel faces existential vulnerability despite American military support, then the value of alignment with Washington and Jerusalem diminishes relative to accommodation with Tehran. The gravitational pull of power is shifting, and regional actors are recalculating their positions to reflect new realities. Saudi Arabia faces immediate strategic recalculation. The rapprochement with Israel that Riyadh has pursued, premised on shared Iranian threat perceptions and American security guarantees, must be reevaluated against Iranian capability to threaten Saudi territory with weapons that Saudi defenses cannot reliably intercept. The normalization agreements that were being negotiated, the defense cooperation that was being expanded, all of it must be reconsidered when the adversary those partnerships were designed to deter has acquired capabilities that render the partnerships insufficient for security provision. Turkey's position is transformed. Ankara has maintained delicate balancing between NATO membership and independent regional positioning, between Western alignment and strategic autonomy. Iranian acquisition of strategic-level deterrence creates opportunities for Turkish influence expansion in a region where American and Israeli power has been constrained. The zero problems with neighbors policy that Turkey abandoned in favor of more assertive regional engagement can be recalibrated to exploit American difficulties in maintaining alliance cohesion and Israeli vulnerabilities in sustaining conventional military dominance. Egypt confronts the reality that the regional power balance that has governed its strategic calculations since Camp David has been permanently altered. The peace with Israel, maintained for decades on the foundation of Israeli military superiority and American security guarantees, must be reconsidered when Israel faces existential vulnerability and American commitments face credibility challenges. The traditional Egyptian role as mediator and stabilizer becomes more valuable and more complex when the parties being mediated possess capabilities to devastate each other's territories. Pakistan watches with particular attention, seeing in Iran's strategic elevation a model for its own deterrence posture and a partner for its own strategic competition with India. The nuclear cooperation that Pakistan and Iran have avoided for decades becomes more attractive when Iran possesses delivery systems and Pakistan possesses warhead technology. The strategic depth that Pakistan has sought through relationships with China and Turkey can be expanded to include Iranian partnership in a broader coalition of powers challenging American regional dominance. The Global South interprets this transfer as confirmation that American hegemony can be successfully challenged, that patient strategic planning can overcome conventional military superiority, that alternative security architectures are viable. Every nation that has chafed under American pressure, that has sought strategic autonomy against Western demands, that has resented sanctions and interventions, sees in Iran's transformed position evidence that resistance is achievable, and that alternative alignments with Russia and China provide pathways to strategic autonomy. The Biden administration faces paralysis. Every option carries catastrophic risks. Military action against Iranian strategic forces would require operational campaigns that would take weeks to organize and execute, during which Iranian missiles would remain on alert and capable of launch on warning. Such campaigns would inflict American casualties potentially exceeding every Middle Eastern conflict combined. Diplomatic engagement occurs from a position of weakened leverage when the adversary has just demonstrated capability to acquire strategic-level weapon systems despite decades of sanctions and isolation. Sanctions escalation loses coercive power when the targeted nation has already acquired the capabilities that sanctions were designed to prevent. Alliance management becomes impossible when partners question American capability to provide security guarantees against threats that American defensive systems cannot reliably intercept. The policy options that Washington is tonight evaluating are all variations of damage limitation rather than outcome reversal. The transfer has occurred, the capabilities are deployed, the strategic balance has shifted. The question is not how to undo what has been done, but how to manage the consequences of a regional order that has been permanently transformed. That management occurs against the reality that American strategic attention is divided across Ukraine, Taiwan, and domestic political crisis, that military resources are stretched, that alliance cohesion is fraying, and that adversaries are coordinating actions specifically designed to exploit American overextension. Israeli decision-makers face the most immediate and catastrophic strategic calculations. How does a state that has built its entire security doctrine on conventional military superiority and escalation dominance function when an adversary possesses the means to inflict existential damage that defenses cannot reliably prevent? How does deterrence operate when both sides possess the capability to devastate the other's territory? How do military operations get planned when every escalation carries the risk of triggering strikes that could kill hundreds of thousands of civilians? These questions have no precedent in Israeli strategic history and no satisfactory answers within existing doctrinal frameworks. The nuclear dimension creates additional complexity that Israeli planners must confront. Israel has maintained deliberate ambiguity about its own nuclear capabilities, neither confirming nor denying possession while ensuring that adversaries understand the implicit threat. That ambiguity has functioned as deterrence because Israel's conventional superiority meant that nuclear weapons were a last resort that would only be employed in truly existential scenarios. Now, Iran possesses conventional delivery systems capable of inflicting existential damage without crossing nuclear thresholds, and Israel must calculate whether its own nuclear capabilities provide meaningful deterrence against an adversary that can threaten Israeli cities with conventional strikes that defenses cannot intercept. The scenario modeling that is tonight being conducted across Israeli defense establishments reveals the geometry of nightmare. Iran fires a salvo of 50 Topol-M missiles targeting Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, Beersheba, and key military installations. Israeli air defenses intercept perhaps a dozen warheads, an optimistic estimate given salvo density and penetration aids. 38 warheads impact across Israeli territory with high explosive payloads measuring in tons per warhead. Casualties number in the hundreds of thousands. Critical infrastructure is devastated. Economic activity collapses. And Iran retains 450 missiles for follow-on strikes if Israel attempts retaliation. How does Israel respond? Nuclear escalation against Iranian cities would invite global condemnation and potential Russian or Chinese intervention. Conventional retaliation would exhaust Israeli munition stockpiles without meaningfully degrading Iranian strategic capabilities. Defensive posture would leave Israel vulnerable to sustained campaigns that would render the country uninhabitable. This is not theoretical analysis. This is the operational reality that Israeli commanders are confronting tonight. The state that has built its existence on military superiority now faces an adversary with the capability to threaten that existence through weapons that military superiority cannot defeat. The psychological impact on Israeli society will be profound. Generations of Israelis have lived with existential threats as abstract possibilities managed through military strength. Now, the threat is concrete, immediate, and beyond the capacity of military strength to reliably neutralize. The national psychology built on confidence in military superiority confronts the reality that superiority is insufficient against capabilities specifically designed to defeat it. The international response remains fragmentary and inadequate. European capitals issue statements expressing concern while offering no meaningful responses. NATO convenes emergency consultations that produce no actionable outcomes. The United Nations Security Council remains paralyzed by Russian and Chinese vetoes. International institutions designed for crisis management prove completely inadequate to address crises orchestrated by permanent Security Council members pursuing strategic objectives that those institutions cannot constrain. The architecture of international order reveals its impotence in the face of coordinated great power action. The historical significance of this moment cannot be overstated. The post-Cold War Middle Eastern order, built on overwhelming American military presence and Israeli conventional dominance, has ended. Not gradually, not through incremental erosion, but through a single strategic transfer that reshapes regional power balances as dramatically as any event since the Iranian Revolution. The unipolar moment in the Middle East, the brief decades when American power was uncontested and outcomes could be imposed on regional actors through military superiority, has concluded. What emerges is a multipolar regional order where American influence is constrained, Israeli security is uncertain, and Iranian strategic autonomy is credible. This transformation will be studied for generations as the moment when careful strategic planning and patient capability development overcame conventional military superiority and alliance advantages. Iran endured decades of pressure specifically to reach this strategic position. Russia executed the transfer that transformed regional balance at the moment of maximum American distraction and minimum response capacity. The coordination between Moscow and Tehran reveals strategic partnership operating at levels that Western analysis has consistently underestimated. The outcome is a Middle East where American hegemony has been successfully challenged, where Israeli security cannot be guaranteed through military superiority, and where alternative power centers have demonstrated the capability to reshape regional order despite Western opposition. If this analysis has provided the strategic clarity that mainstream commentary refuses to deliver, if you need this level of depth to understand what is actually happening at the sharp edge of global power competition, subscribe to this channel right now, because the story that begins tonight will define the next generation of Middle Eastern geopolitics. Hit that notification bell to ensure you never miss an update as this situation unfolds. Share this breakdown with everyone in your network who is serious about understanding the transformations that are reshaping global order. In a world where power balances shift overnight and strategic certainties dissolve, analysis this sharp is not optional, it is necessary. The night that 500 Topol-M missiles crossed into Iranian territory is the night that Middle Eastern strategic reality was permanently transformed. The deterrence relationships that have governed regional security for decades have been inverted. The military superiority that Israel has relied upon for survival has been rendered insufficient. The extended deterrence commitments that America has extended to regional partners have been exposed as inadequate against threats that defensive systems cannot reliably intercept. The unipolar order that Washington sought to maintain through military dominance has been replaced by multipolar reality, where American power can be challenged and Israeli security can be threatened by adversaries possessing strategic-level capabilities. History will mark this as the moment when patient strategy defeated immediate power, when long-term planning overcame short-term dominance, when the supposed rules-based international order revealed its inability to constrain great powers pursuing strategic objectives through coordinated action. The world that exists tomorrow is fundamentally different from the world that existed yesterday. And no one in Washington, Tel Aviv, or any Western capital appears prepared for the consequences of that transformation. Stay sharp, stay ahead, and never stop questioning the narratives that power wants you to accept without examination.